Wait, you have a TV?
No. I just like to read the TV guide. Read the TV guide. You don't need a TV. Television addict! Television addict! Television addict!
Hey everybody, Ken Reed here, your TV guidance counselor on the show TV Guidance Counselor, the show in which each and every week since February 14th, 2014, I have discussed the classic difficult viewing choices of our collective past using issues of TV Guide magazine from my personal collection with a guest. And it's still going, and I'm still enjoying it. I hope you are too. Welcome to all our new listeners. I noticed a little uptick in listeners recently, so I'd love to hear how you heard about the show. Feel free to email me at tvguidancecounselor@gmail.com or ken at icanread.com. icanread.com, of course, being my stand-up comedy page. Still sort of on hiatus. It's a whole other discussion, but I don't know how to get back into stand-up. It's a strange thing. I was very spoiled before in that never did open mics pretty much ever, and always did my own shows. And now I just turned 41 and I'm an old person. I started when I was 21 and I just don't have the energy to do my own shows these days. I don't know. And I was very lucky. I got to open for just big people at big theaters and do good shows. And so it's daunting. I know that's a real privilege problem. Anyway, that's a whole different discussion. If you'd like to discuss it, you can do so with me at the aforementioned email addresses that I gave out before, or I'm on social media at Kenneth W. Reed, R-E-I-D, or at TV Guidance. We can discuss it there. Also want to thank our new patrons. Again, I'm always just blown away by the fact that you give your hard-earned money to me to support the show. I cannot thank you enough. It is a huge help to getting the show done. And it keeps me from losing money on the show. But I'd do it anyway, because I really love talking to people about this sort of thing. And I've gotten to meet and befriend so many cool people that I've had as either guests on the show or listeners. And it's just, it's a good time. So anyway, if you want to become a patron, you can do so at TV Guidance Counselor on Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/TV Guidance Counselor and you can sign up there. And I'd very much appreciate it. Or you don't have to either. Whatever you want to do. And if you like the show, wherever you listen to the show, feel free to rate and review it. It helps offset the 1-star reviews I get occasionally. But you don't have to, but again, it's a huge help and I appreciate it very much. Anyway, speaking of things I appreciate very much, my discussion with my guest this week is one of them. My guest this week is Michelle Bossy. She is a director, super talented. She's done a ton of shorts and TV stuff, but she has a feature out now called Under the Lantern Lit Sky. It is set in 1927 Mississippi. It's a very good movie. We talk about it here. It's a really interesting era in time. Definitely check it out. I will put links up to where you can find it. Recently, she had a physical premiere of this, but I'm sure it will be available to you in your home at some point in the very near future. But it's very good. Under the Lantern Lit Sky, directed by Michelle Bossy, and love talking to her. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode of TV Guidance Counselor with my guest, Michelle Bossy.
TV is my friend, and it has been always there for me in time of need.
Live via satellite from the West Coast, Michelle Bossy, how are you?
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
You're very welcome. We were chatting a little bit before, and I was nervous about slaughtering your name, but it is Bossy.
It's funny because so many people think it's a stage name or something. It is not a stage name. I'm Mexican American, but my father's grandfather was born in Switzerland, which is just this odd thing, so this little part of me is Swiss French and it's Bossy, and it works though, because my mother is a school teacher.
You're a director.
Yeah. So my sister's a chef, so we carry our name well. We like to, kindly boss people around.
Yes.
So.
And also you're warning them in advance. So, you're like, hey, you know what you're getting into.
That's right. That's right. If you sign on to this project, you're probably going to get a little boss here and there.
It's bossy. So the issue we picked here was from 1998, and you wanted May 1998 or summer 1998. I think you said sort of June-ish. May 30th 98. To June 5th, 1998, the week after Frank Sinatra died. So he's on the cover here.
Yeah, I picked this week because I graduated from high school this week, and I thought that
Me too.
I would. You did?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh! And here I thought I was dating myself, but cool. I'm glad we're on the same page there. But also, I was so surprised to see Frank Sinatra on the cover because I'm from Las Vegas originally, and we have a Las Vegas connection to Frank Sinatra. My grandma's boyfriend managed the Sinatra family.
Oh, wow.
I saw them play. They were like household names growing up. You know, we were always, and my mom is Italian on that side. So there was this real sense of Vegas history. The Rat Pack played at one of my grandma's hotels all of the time. And it was just actually, my love of entertainment started really young because there was this sort of entertainment connection. And the Sinatra family feature heavily in our family history.
That's funny that it worked out that way. And it's also like Las Vegas, like Los Angeles, number one industry is entertainment, which is very unusual and not how most people grow up.
It was a bizarre place to grow up for sure, but it's also a very nice place. You know, there's community there. I mean, I definitely was sheltered. So it was okay. It worked out. It's a, you know, it's sort of, most people have this fantasy about Las Vegas and what it is.
Is there a movie or television series that you've seen that actually captures Las Vegas the way you experienced it growing up?
I thought the most perfect thing, it was actually the book, The Goldfinch. I thought it was absolutely perfect the way it described Vegas, especially during the housing boom. I don't think the film was as successful, although I did enjoy the film because I thought it was really well crafted, especially the transitions. But yeah, I think it's hard to capture. Have you seen something about Vegas that you really enjoyed?
Stuff that I don't know. I don't think it's representative of Vegas. I've never been. Yeah. In fact, the only place in Nevada I've been is Reno, I did a convention there. And incidentally, the first night of the convention, I did stand up, and the bill was me, Jimmy Walker, and the unknown comic. So that was a little weird. But you know, like the show The Night Stalker was set in Vegas, not the Richard Ramirez, the Darren McGavin sort of pre-X-Files type show. And the show Vegas with Robert Urich, I loved, and that was set in Vegas. But again, I don't think representative.
Right.
Although I think, did you ever see the movie Over the Edge with Matt Dillon?
I did. Yeah, that's a good one.
I think that's like sort of in the weird sort of housing developments around sort of Vegas, or it might be Arizona.
That's cool.
Where those kids just hang out in half-built houses.
That's sort of what the Goldfinch is, you know. That's where he takes that turn and moves to Vegas, I think. But yeah, I don't think like leaving Las Vegas is representative of the experience of Las Vegas. You know, none of us have had like. Most people in Las Vegas have had a pretty normcore life, so.
You mean it's not Showgirls? I'm surprised you didn't immediately say Showgirls.
You know what, though? It is Showgirls, actually. It's definitely Showgirls.
Definitely. And it's interesting, before we get into the issue here, is that someone like Frank Sinatra, and obviously I'm biased and we're the same age as we've discovered, but there were sort of people who were massively famous, and famous in a way that is not possible to be now, just because stuff is so narrow casted and so niche, that we grew up with, that felt like they would just be around forever. And before us, it was like Elvis, it was like Marilyn Monroe, or these people that just seem not like real people. And Sinatra was one of them. I think maybe the last few was like Bowie or Prince, Michael Jackson. And, you know, like there's not a lot left, and there's no one that's sort of taken their place in that way that your grandmother knew who they were. Like everybody just knows who they were, even if they don't know their work. Right.
I think that's also because there's this thing where people's lives are accessible in this way too. So, you see them at the grocery store, they're like, you know, having a barbecue, and everything's on TikTok or Instagram. And so you know them in this way. Where Frank Sinatra's sighting felt like, oh my gosh, it was larger than life. And life is very quotidian now.
You think it's
maybe
better?
Less pedestals are a good thing. Maybe.
Yeah, I think yes and no. It's funny because I was talking to someone the other day about how I feel like late night shows are so unnecessary. And the reason being that when we were growing up, that was the only way you saw a celebrity be themselves, sort of. I mean, it was manufactured, but you saw them in movies playing characters or singing songs, and like to see them talking to someone as themselves was the value you got in watching like the Tonight Show. And now like it's just a plug fest,
Right.
and you can watch them on Instagram live, like digging a hole in their yard for an hour.
Yeah.
Like, okay, which is very strange. Before we get into the issue here proper, I did want to ask too, just because I'm a big fan of luchadora movies and like the El Santo and those weird 60s and 70s Mexican wrestling / horror films. And we weirdly got them in Boston. And we had a
Wow.
channel, we had a Spanish language channel. And I used to watch them and I had no idea what was going on and just loved them. And so I'm curious, someone who's Mexican American and grew up Mexican American, was that a part of stuff you watched when you were growing up?
Mostly what I watched was like my grandma watched soap operas, over the top telenovellas, But my parents, because I think my dad came here as a little kid and he really wanted us to assimilate in this way. So he was, maybe he watched that, but I think he definitely wanted us to, a lot of the things I'm going to name, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, that is so American of that generation. And even I had to sort of go back and work on my Spanish and work on, kind of uncovering my heritage, because it was that generation where they really wanted you to blend in and don't stick, passes. I mean, I sound like a white woman, my name is Michelle. It's not a super Mexican name, right? So I think it's better to kind of have a connection to that part of your life. I would prefer it. So that's why I'm doing a little work now in the retroactively.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I have a bunch of friends that grew up, they're like Filipino or and their parents were very like, we don't speak the language at home. Like, we don't want you to stick out, sort of. And it was that one generation.
Yeah.
And I think it's swung back now where it's sort of seen as an asset
Totally.
to have both. But there is sort of a generation that sort of missed out on that. Whereas I'm just the most boring whiteness that ever whited.
But you watched luchador wrestling movie, that's pretty cool. So
that's true. Yeah, television is the only thing that allowed me to expand my horizons and experience other cultures here in Boston, where like the sum total of our cultural heritage is like fluffernutter sandwiches.
Oh my gosh.
So let's dive in. What'd you do Saturday night here?
So one of my favorite shows when I was, I guess, a tween or a teenager was The Wonder Years, which I just love. First of all, best soundtrack ever. Fred Savage was so cute. Like the whole cast, it was such a wholesome look, but then also, great voiceover. How infrequently is voiceover used to that effect, which I thought was so cool. And then I also picked Absolutely Fabulous, which I love Ab Fab. I mean, Patsy and Adina were such bad girls, but such a funny, weird look at that culture. They were like too old to be behaving the way they were. And I just thought that was such a great show. And then a show I never watched actually when I was younger, but I thought maybe this would be fun to actually watch at this point, is the X-Files. Did you ever watch the X-Files?
I did. It's strange because I don't know. Are you a big sci-fi horror fan in general?
I'm not. I'm not that, but there are certain things I love that are really excellent, and I wonder, because X-Files has such a cult, it was such a big phenomenon, right? So
yeah, so there's a show that was on about 10 years ago on Fox that J.J. Abrams' Bad Robot did called Fringe. That I love that show. I think it's probably the best sci-fi show of the last decade, and one of the best shows from a dramatic standpoint like I've ever seen. Like, it's just brilliant, and I always, because it's a sci-fi show, but it's about fathers and sons and letting people die, and it's like got all these great themes, and it's such a good way. It's also one of the best examples I've ever seen of a show that manages to link their A story and their B story so that they complement each other and comment on each other.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's just really well done. And, the X-Files came up frequently when it was on. And I remember watching the X-Files when it was on and enjoying it. So I was like, I'm going to go back and rewatch the X-Files. This is literally like when COVID started. And I got to through a season and a half, and I'm like, this is really a mess, and it's really boring. Because they're basically just remaking, for the most part, popular horror movies in this world. It's like, oh, they're doing The Thing, or this one is, Close Encounters. And then
okay.
the mythology is so clearly bullshit. Like, they're making it up as they go along, and they have no idea where it's going, and it's really evident. So it's worth it as the cultural sort of touchstone, because there was, to your point, it was massive, and it sort of changed popular culture.
Yeah.
But it's okay. Wonder Years I loved. And to your point, too, about the voiceover, it is sort of a lost art to have that sincere inner dialogue voiceover, because now I feel like shows with voiceover, it's a way to get more jokes in. I
think so, or move the plot along without doing the heavy lifting of like really building plot, So I really appreciate that show. I actually think the whole cast was tremendous. I mean, I visually can think of these moments of Fred Savage at the swimming pool, or like what his bedroom looked like. It was very iconic the way they did it. And, of course, I have such a soft spot. The whole soundtrack. I mean, I had the soundtrack.
Yeah, it was 4 volumes, I think, on CD.
I totally had that CD jewel case. I listened to it, and it was fantastic. So I think it actually ended up being so much more than a TV show. It felt kind of filmic in its way, like there was a lot of attention to detail, it was precise in a great way.
Yeah, and none of the jokes came from, hey, look, it's the 60s. Look at this stupid thing. And it wasn't like, one of the things I found off-putting about Mad Men was, first of all, I joke about this, but it's true. People recommended Mad Men to me because of my haircut. Which I'm like, don't do that. But I was like, yeah, okay, it's a bunch of 60s stuff. That's cool. But like, there's nothing, I don't like any of the characters. Like, there's no story here. But Wonder Years, it was set in the 60s, and the sort of social things going on influenced the story, rather than like, hey, look, stuff from the 60s was worse than stuff we have now. So, it's like, and me too, like those things stick in my mind. That final episode with the 4th of July parade, and you find out that the dad died. Oh my God, like just Niagara Falls from my face. And then are you in Los Angeles?
I'm in LA, yeah.
Okay. I don't know if you've done this before, but the house, the house is in Burbank.
I didn't know that.
The Arnold's house in that street is in Burbank. It's I'll send you the address if you want, or it's super easy to Google. And it's just so weird to drive by it as someone who grew up watching that show, because A, it's the house, but B, that show felt very I think it took place outside Detroit or something.
Yeah, maybe.
But when you're on the street, it's filled with palm trees, and you're like, man, there was like 2 camera angles they could shoot this stuff from without it being obvious that it's Burbank, and they managed to do it.
That's really funny. I didn't know that. I mean, I as an adult, I haven't gone back and kind of researched the Wonder Years. I enjoyed it purely as an audience member, and I wasn't making film at the time either. So, very different to go back and look at it now from that perspective.
Is there anything you watched growing up that you have gone back and revisited sort of as a filmmaker with your current adult eye and experienced it very?
Yeah, I have some on the list actually, which will be fun. So I'll definitely talk about that. But cool. Yeah.
We get to them. So Sunday night, would you?
So it's a really wide range of things, but I chose Muppets Tonight, Awakenings, and So I Married an Axe Murderer. And Awakenings, I was a huge, I just like that movie was very compelling to me. It was like a psychological drama, it felt very, I remember seeing it as a teenager and feeling like, oh, wow, this is profound. It's a little over my head. I've got to do some work to kind of try to understand it. But I thought it sticks with me. I can visually see that. And then I was a huge fan of SNL, and obviously Mike Meyers at the time was such a huge star. And so, I saw that. I think I saw that in the movie theater.
Me too.
And I'm a huge Muppets fan. I will love the Muppets till the day I die. I think they're just the greatest. Talk about like nothing is ever at their expense. It's always a sophisticated. I love that the Muppets are for adults and children. I love any entertainment that is not just for one group of people. So yeah, that was sort of like a very eclectic. I don't even think I watched TV on Sunday nights, probably because it was a school night but yeah. I grew up in a house. We went to Catholic school my whole life, and we had strict rules. We weren't allowed to like watch MTV. We weren't allowed to watch like Beavis and Butthead or The Simpsons or Married with Children, so I missed some stuff too when I was younger. Like I missed some big cultural things that were happening. The Muppets, of course,
That's always the list. The one you just hit that like so many times talking to people, it's those 4 shows. And The Simpsons people forget now because it's such an institution that when it first came on, parents were like, this is so disrespectful and rude. And it was like really kind of a taboo show. And Fox had that reputation as like, this is the, like the badass network. And it's, and it doesn't kind of fit with those other shows now. But when you would like go to friends' houses or when you moved out, did you feel like, oh, now I can binge this stuff or I have to catch up or I got to see these things I missed?
Absolutely. The Simpsons I watch now, and I know a lot of people who like live and die by Simpsons. There's this very famous Simpsons episode that makes fun of the Music Man, and I think Conan O'Brien wrote it, right? Yep. But I'm also a theater director, so that episode it's a phenomenal episode actually, because it's so intelligent, it's so complex, and what they're parodying is such a big moment culturally that they're also taking on, and they do it so successfully. So, that for sure. I don't think I would watch Married with Children now, but I definitely watched some MTV, as soon as I possibly could. I was like, I want to know what all these music videos are about. I want to know. And I felt like my cooler friends were definitely allowed to, they watch TRL, they watch all these things. And
I always think of Vegas as like, oh man, parents must be so permissive there.
Opposite.
Yeah.
My parents were like, don't look at that billboard. It has, they're in bikinis. Oh my God. And I feel like my mom was overcorrecting because, and I appreciate it actually. I think it's a hard city to navigate in this way that it's a lot about, your shadow self, like doing crazy, risky stuff, or, you come to Vegas to be this, to let loose and, children growing up in that environment is sort of like, what are children doing
right
here,
You're living in other people's hedonism.
That's hedonistic. Exactly. It's extreme too.
Yeah.
I think you either like gamble, you go whole hog, or you like never set foot in a casino, right? So, yeah.
It's fascinating to me, and I weirdly know a bunch of people that grew up in Vegas, so it's always interesting to kind of hear how.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah, a lot of people that no shock went into entertainment, or writing about entertainment. Before we move on to Monday, the Muppets is I love the Muppets so much, and I cannot get past like when Jim Henson died. That was the first celebrity death that just it felt like a gut punch as a kid. And I just, it's still to this day, it kind of bothers me.
Yeah. I mean, it never was the same. Right.
No.
And I appreciate the impulse to like keep it going, but in this other way, the voices and the kind of culture and, it's different. It just can't be replicated. It was so pure and so excellent.
He was what I call a fuck you hippie. He was one of those hippies that was like kind of angry, like, you guys are screwing it up for everybody and we're going to tell you about it. And so he had this subversive while being really sincere and had sort of no irony and did set out to like make people better people for having seen the work that he did, and successfully, I think. And it's funny because the last show he worked on before he died, which came out after he died, was Dinosaurs, that show.
I actually watched, because TGIF was on the list of a show of a
on Friday
program of shows. Yeah, you could
Cool.
totally, like, my mom loved like Step by Step and Perfect Strangers, all that stuff. So yeah.
The stuff he got away with on Dinosaurs, like literally the last episode of Dinosaurs, if you remember it, the dinosaurs are so selfish. They pollute the earth till it becomes another ice age. And then they all die in the last episode. The last line on the show is the baby going, "Dad, are we going to die?" And he's like, "I don't know, son." And then it just fades to black.
Wow. You know what? I have not thought of Dinosaurs as an existential crisis about a show about the end of the world. We should probably take another look at Dinosaurs, right?
Yeah, it's amazing.
We seem to be going through that ourselves.
Yeah, I'm like 30 years ago they told us what'd you
Amazing.
guys miss? But yeah, that's I think what's missing from it. And have you ever been to the Museum of the Moving Image in Astoria, Queens?
Yes, actually, I used to live across the street when I lived in New York from that museum.
Did you live there when the Henson exhibit was there?
I didn't, but I had friends who went and they said it was phenomenal.
Oh,
Did you go?
It's amazing. Like, it's still there. And if you ever find yourself back there again, you have to go.
I mean,
I walked in.
I will be there this week.
Oh, you got to go then. You have to go. It's still there. I walked in and immediately I started tearing up because right when you walk in, it's Rolf, and it's actual Rolf. Like it's Rolf. I was like, it's Rolf, and there's stuff like Henson's original notes about Labyrinth and like his original sketches. And like, it's just unbelievable. Like, as a fan, it's
okay.
Yeah,
I'm going.
It's magical. There's very few things I would call magical in life, and this was one of them. Monday, what'd you do?
Monday, I watched The Big Chill, which is absolutely one of my favorite movies of all time, and I also watched Ally McBeal, which I thought was like really a fun show. I loved how we'll talk about Big Chill like in a second, but what I loved about Ally McBeal was it really played with like what is magical realism, but in an office setting, so, and I think the cast was really great. They had a great chemistry. Obviously the creator is still so incredibly successful, right? Like you have TV superpowers working on that, show. And yeah, I mean, I think it was my idea of like, oh, this is what it looks like to be an adult professional, with a twist, right? But Calissa Flockhart was so cute on it, and I think that was her first like big hit, right? Her first major.
First and kind of last-ish.
I know, isn't that interesting? I mean, she had such a run of it. Nothing else really pops for me about her, right?
I think she did a couple movies. I feel like she's on Supergirl now, maybe, but that show was so massive and didn't really re-air in reruns. I'm not even sure if it's streaming right now, but like the biggest cultural phenomenon for like 2 years. I mean, that Dancing Baby was, and people just kind of forget about it now. And I think she's sort of a victim of that, in that she's the star of this major show, although she did get a lot of crap at the time, a ton of tabloid stuff. So I think maybe she should have stepped back because of that. But it was a really interesting show because in some ways it was very old fashioned. That sort of magical realism was basically right out of like Secret Life of Walter Mitty type stuff. But or kids shows like The Adventures of Pete and Pete was like that. Or, there was some live action shows for younger people, but it was interesting to see it in an adult drama that didn't seem stupid.
No, I thought it was sophisticated, really. Yeah. And again, the music was excellent on that show. The music was always really smart, very effective. There was great choreography on that show. I wonder who the choreographer was. Probably somebody very famous that has done a ton of shows, but I'll look that up. I'll get back to you on that.
I'm like, it wasn't Paula Abdul. It wasn't Tony Basil. But was it Kenny Ortega? Is there one after that? It's going to be one of those.
No, that was my guess. Kenny Ortega.
It might be. I mean, he did everything. Hull High was his show, like his High School Musical type.
High School Musical, yeah. He's so big then.
It's funny how he, as a person who's into musical theater and Broadway and that sort of stuff, that's been a genre in an entertainment vehicle for 200 years, and translating that to television was always just didn't work until recently. And so people crap on shows like Cop Rock or things like that, but I'm like, but this is like a tried and true genre. Like, it's not that silly.
No, but I think like tonally it's hard to hit,
Right.
It's hard to make it really work. Especially, TV got really cynical for a while too, and it got really narrow. I think now it's so exciting because so many more things go on television. But for a while it was like all procedural, not it wasn't really about like imagination as much, I think. So
Yeah, it was, you're right, cynical. It was like, everything's stupid, let's laugh at.
yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, sincerity was not looked at as an asset. You've mentioned music a few times in a few shows, and the shows you mentioned had sort of pop music soundtrack. I think the case with those. Do you find that when you're doing films that you want to score them that way too, rather than like a traditional score? Do you hear like pop music underscoring the things you direct?
That's a good question. I actually didn't realize how much of my list would be built on the music, and also The Big Chill, which is from Monday Night too. Huge, influential soundtrack on that one. I wouldn't say that well, first of all, music is so much about genre, right? So, I haven't done something yet that was really about this song of this moment. Getting song rights in filmmaking is just almost impossible. It is a super hard thing to do. So on this feature that I just made, we had two brilliant composers who wrote an original score. And then I actually went through a publishing house, and they had a stock of certain kinds of songs that were really from the 1920s and 30s that were right for us. So actually that was very cool because I'd never done that kind of deep digging process. And I'm very happy with the music. I love the music on this film. And I think that, it really helps to tell the story in a way. But I would be, I can't wait till that time in my career where I can be like, yeah, we need this Smokey Robinson song, right, or, we need this Dua Lipa song, right? Like just be able to have it as part of the work. So I'm definitely at this point where I'm like scrappy, trying to bring my people together, and definitely rely a lot on composers and people who do this professionally, and they really do it for film. I have another really incredible collaborator named Darren Morsey, and he's scored most of my films, so especially my short ones. And then the women who wrote the soundtrack for my feature, Mesa Pullman and Dalal Bruckman, and they're just really special. And they sing on the film too, on the soundtrack, which is great. So yeah, but I actually, when I was a kid, everybody finds their way into entertainment differently. I found my way in as a musical theater actress. So, my big dream when I was younger was to sing and dance on Broadway. And I'm glad I don't do that. I have a lot of much more successful, brilliant friends who are very suited for that. But I still really love music. And I love how when that perfect song matches with that perfect image, you'll never forget it, right? Music sits in us deeper than dialogue can. It sits in a more fundamental place in our bodies, actually. So I think that's why we remember those moments. And I think that's maybe why so many people love The Big Chill. It's not just the most incredible cast ever. What a bunch of heavy hitters, but also like the music, all those Stone songs going perfectly with the image,
I'm sure someone listening will write in, correct me, but I think it was the first sort of nostalgic pop music soundtrack, American Graffiti, but it was a massive chart hit, that soundtrack. Like, it was huge. Like, if you go into any used record store or Goodwill now, they'll have at least 2 copies of the Big Chill sack. Like, it was, everybody had it. And it was this sort of perfect compilation of music people who grew up in the 60s listened to. It sort of hit just the exact right group of people at the right time. There are songs that hit me when I hear them, I've gone back and revisited John Hughes films. They have a lot of problems with a lot of them now that I didn't have when I was growing up. But like hearing like the Dream Academy, Edge of Forever, which is that sort of romantic song and crescendo and Ferris, like that still even as an adult, if I see that scene now, I'm kind of like the music though, I still get that emotional response just from that.
Man, I love Ferris Bueller's. Such a great film.
I do really like that movie. I had the really weird but amazing experience years ago of having Molly Ringwald on.
Oh, cool.
It was who's the nicest, funny how normal she is, but also has that weird, that movie star thing, or that thing when you meet someone and you're like, oh, they have the thing. Like, it's just this odd magnetism that you can't explain. But she was talking to me about how her and her daughters were watching the Hughes movies, and she hadn't watched them really since she did them, and how she felt really weird about them. And a lot of the stuff in it, she was like this. And it was just the most fascinating conversation to hear her feel that way. Who was in them? It was like a dissociative thing almost. But yeah, I love it. Tuesday, what'd you do?
On Tuesday, oh my gosh, Tuesday was a really good movie day. I watched Empire Records and The Hudsucker Proxy, which couldn't be more far-reaching films, right? But Empire Records, great soundtrack. Also, like young Liv Tyler, and that kind of slacker generation, like how which is really that entry point for all of those films that came later, like Mallrats, or maybe Mallrats. I don't even know. Maybe Mallrats was a contemporary of that.
I think it was a contemporary. I think they were both 96, I want to say.
Yeah.
Then Empire Records, the big hit was Girl Like You by Edwyn Collins, which is such a great song. That's so bizarre. And that movie was looked at as sort of a throwback to movies like The Breakfast Club for the 90s, because it was like, all takes place in one day, and it's this sort of mixture of teenagers who have different problems. Can't Hardly Wait was another one that sort of fell into that. But I think people of our age we've been labeled what's the word, geriatric millennials is what they call us.
Great.
But seeing that sort of people who were like college age when we were in high school, the Gen X people seem just so cool. Like, as a teenager, you're like, man, they work in a record store and they're kind of like, whatever. Oh, it just was this like aspirational, like Singles or Reality Bites, or like all those people. You were like, that'd be awesome.
Oh my gosh, I really wanted to be that. It was just out of reach. I was just a little young to be, working in a record store. And but I love, even that song, I think it's Hey Jealousy by the Gin Blossoms.
Oh, I love that song.
Starts the movie off, and I was like, oh gosh, this is going to be a great movie. I just felt that.
Yeah. I can't believe they've never done a movie about the Gin Blossoms. Do you remember their whole deal?
No.
A little side note. So they're from Arizona, and the guy who wrote every song on that first record killed himself before the record came out. So the band went on and there was like 8 massive singles off that record. And it's without the guy who wrote all of it, but he plays on the record. It's like his band. And then that sort of going on after. It's like, I can't think of another scenario like that. Like even the Stones.
Yeah.
But I'm like, that's fascinating. A lot of movies, were you a big going to the movies person? Were you renting a lot of stuff, or was it like TV was kind of your movie education?
We were allowed to rent movies, obviously it had to be like PG-13, or if we were at a friend's house, we could like get away with a rated R movie. Although for some reason we were allowed to watch Cocktail at a very young age. I do not know why. That movie is, watching that as an adult, I'm like, this is not for children. But it's
not for anyone. That's such a bad movie. In hindsight, I'm like, this is awful.
It's a strange movie. But my mom really loved movies. She grew up, and a few movies I'm going to do coming up are movies my mom loved. And I feel like she just really still watches TMC, Turner Movie Classics. She loves going to the movies. And I think, even though I never in a million years thought I could be a film director, nobody thinks that, or very few of us think, wow, that's what I'm going to choose. I did think there were so many great movies. So we went to the movies a lot. And also, it's super hot in Vegas. And if you're underage in Vegas, you couldn't like do a lot. So, your choices were going to the movies. Sometimes you go to the bowling alley. And so in high school, we'd do that kind of thing. We'd do like very family friendly kinds of things. And sometimes have a party in a hotel, which was like, whoa, so crazy. And I just loved movies. I have like my old DVDs. I don't know what to do with them, but I have them. So,
well, I keep everything that has like a commentary track because you can't, there's like a small handful of movies that even though they're streaming, like I don't trust it. I'm like, no, I need to have a copy of Real Genius at all times. I need to have Valley Girl and Dawn of the Dead. Like I need that. But they are hard to let go of. But growing up in the era we did, I don't know what my dogs are barking. They're probably just murdering someone.
No.
But growing up in the era we did, and now having the ability to watch anything you want at any time, anywhere, is insane.
That's what I was thinking about reading the TV guide. I mean, sure, everybody says this when they come on your show. They're like, wow, you only had about 15 choices. And look at how it's laid out. I mean, it's 100 and something pages, this TV guide. And, to imagine a TV guide for this day and age is an impossible thing. It would never... How could you? The internet changed everything, and really interesting to be on either side of it. Kids who only know the internet, or like older people who had struggled to adapt to it. I mean, I think we were just in such a perfect age to really take it right on and move right with it. And I'm grateful. I'm really glad I can say, oh my gosh, I want to watch Moonstruck. Here's how I watch it. Oh, you've never seen this movie. Let me show you right now. Stop what you're doing. You must watch it. And, that used to be much harder to do, so that feels special.
When I wanted to see Eraserhead,
yeah,
I had to literally take 2 buses and a train to the one video store that had it in Boston, bring it home, watch it, take 2 buses and a train the next day to return it, and then come back home. And it's not having to do that is amazing.
Mind you, by the way, you had to call all the video stores in town first to find out who had it, right? And so, that's insane now to think about.
And kind of be like, can you hold it for me? And they're like, for a day, I don't know. And you're like, I might go there and you might not even have it.
Right.
So let's jump to Wednesday. What'd you do Wednesday night?
Wednesday, I watched Romancing the Stone, which I think that was one of my mother's favorite movies. And, Kathleen Turner and Michael Douglas they had such incredible chemistry. I think it's like a very strange, like the premise is so strange. It's really very, I don't know if it would hold up now, but I kind of want to watch it to see if it would hold up. And then I also, because of the Mike Meyers connection, watched Austin Powers, which is
I love that movie.
Fun. And yeah, it's so fun, right? Elizabeth Hurley too. I loved Elizabeth Hurley. I was like, she's the most beautiful woman alive. She was such a glamazon, and just really, she's not a brilliant actress, but she was so good in that movie.
She was perfectly cast. She's really funny in that too. Like she gets what she's going for. It was perfect casting. And yeah, I think that movie is sort of unfairly maligned because everyone when they think about that movie, just thinks of every not funny person going like, yeah, baby. Yeah, and I'm like, yeah, but the movie's actually funny. Like, don't judge it for that. And So I Married an Axe Murderer, to your point earlier, is such an under the radar Mike Myers movie because that is this will sound insane, the most naturalistic Mike Myers movie.
No, totally. Like it's sort of plausible that would happen, right? So
it's not an SNL character. It's not Wayne's World. It's not those sorts of things. It's like just a guy.
He plays the straight man in that film, right? So it's not him doing a bunch of gags. It's him like reacting to all of this craziness that's going on around him. But I love Dr. Evil. I love that character. I think that is actually my favorite part of Austin Powers is that, the way he sent up all of those supervillain kind of ideas. And even there's a little bit of a reference to Inspector Gadget, which I watched as a child.
The claw,
right? And so you see like that hand stroking the cat. I mean, it's so great because there's a lot of little Easter eggs in Austin Powers that you really have to know the genre and then, swinging 60s and it's fun. It's a fun movie. I don't think the sequel, I don't know how many they did. I know they did a second one.
I think there's 2 others.
Definitely, they did not do what the first one did for me. You know, I was like, the first one is great. And then I think they focused too much on like fat bastard or the other
catchphrases.
You know,
Yeah.
But,
yeah, it does that thing that pastiches do at their best when it's made by people who truly love the things that they're sort of parodying and throwing in there. And it's not made by people who think those things are terrible and they're really trying to like, look at this dumb which I think is what things like that Not Another Teen Movie. Like, they're just like, everything's stupid. Look at this stupid thing. Whereas that's like, I love all this stuff and I recognize there's silly aspects. Let's make the best silly version of that possible, which is, again, to me, sincerity. Like if you're making a movie sincerely, even a dumb comedy, it comes across.
Right.
I think. What'd you do Thursday?
Thursday, I watched Barefoot in the Park, which it's a Neil Simon play that became a film, right? And it's so charming and so delightful. Robert Redford, Jane Fonda, and they were just so sweet and young. And it's all about how you fall in love with, right? Do you know the story? They fall in love. I don't remember it. You know, she's adventurous. He's wound really tight. You know, will they ever get along? Which is a sort of Neil Simon trope, right? Like there's opposites and how can they work it out? But you think that it's going to fall apart and then it doesn't. And it's just New York, which I love New York. I lived there for a long, long time. And this is a movie definitely my mother showed me. And then I watched again and again. I mean, I'm sure, in this era that we're in with the way culture has shifted, we would watch it and be like, oh my God, the husband is so overbearing. And,
right.
You know, they're so gender like constraining of these two people and the wife doesn't work or whatever. But I actually think there is a sweetness to it as well. And the production design, I remember vividly because it was a whole 2-story kind of loft, you know, and they keep saying how poor they are. But of course, it's a palace comparatively to places I've lived in New York. And then I also said Jeopardy and was sad about Alex Trebek, of course. It was like such a big part of our culture. And then, you know, I love it when I get the answers right. I love it when I know, you know, it's such a fun thing to play along with. And it's so, it's just something you could have on in the background but it also kind of makes me feel like a nostalgia, you know, even though it was on until very recently, it feels maybe the way it was produced was always just so, it never evolved, right? Like it didn't change.
It's always the same, even though like they'd update technology a little bit or, you know, the screen there's digital now, like it always feels the same. It's sort of this out of time thing. And it was always sort of a nostalgic thing to me too, because I remember at least here in Boston, it was always like 7:00 was Wheel of Fortune, 7:30 was Jeopardy. And so it would be the thing you'd kind of sit and watch while you were getting ready to watch what was on at 8. So it was like a calming palate cleanser of a TV show in a lot of ways. Before we moved to Friday, when you moved to New York, had you been there before or was that your first experience going there?
I'd been to New York when I was a child with my grandmother who was in entertainment, and she'd go to trade shows all over the world, and she would take her grandchildren to sort of show them the world sometimes. So we went to New York. We saw Phantom of the Opera and Les Mis in a week. I was 10. I thought, this is what I'm doing with the entire rest of my life. I will never do anything else. You know, we went to the New York Public Library and Bryant Park. It was just such an incredible, the greatest hits of New York. We went to we climbed the Statue of Liberty, which you could still do. Mm-hmm. Go into her torch, actually, which you can't do anymore. And we went to Ellis Island, and I just thought, this is for me. This is it. And, you know, the thing that shifted really, I was there 16 years and, I produced theater, I directed theater. And when I started making movies, it's just really hard to do that anywhere but Los Angeles. So you kind of, you know, and LA in a great way is much closer to my family. So during the pandemic, I could go to San Francisco or Vegas where my family is. And, you know, I do appreciate that. But even before pandemic, I was sort of going back and forth. I teach for NYU. I've made plays and movies in New York since leaving there. So I'm trying to have a foot in both places. But being bi-coastal is super tricky, especially when you're not really supposed to be flying across the country. So now we'll see what happens. It's but I think New York is like everything it promises to be and more, and it's ever evolving. And I just love how diverse and crazy and fun it is.
Even now, where I think culture's become a lot less monoculture, but also the world's become a lot smaller, and the sort of diversity. The diversity has spread out to more places that it never used to be. So, more stuff is, I don't know how I could phrase this. It's not that more stuff is the same. It's that we have access to more stuff in more places. So the places that used to be all about access are a little bit less special generally. And New York is sort of the quintessential place where everything is. But it hasn't become less special, and also still remains dramatically different from Los Angeles. Like they haven't grown more similar as time has gone on. Interesting.
Right. But I think because there's so much space in Los Angeles, people are not, which I actually really appreciated during the pandemic, right? I mean, it was really helpful to be able to walk my dog and not feel like I was on top of somebody. But I also think you're never going to have that kind of pressure cooker of ideas and, just all those points of view colliding in this great, amazing way. And it's much easier to live here too.
Oh, absolutely.
So you don't feel that kind of pressure, that creation pressure. When you create, there's a different access point to it, which for better or worse, I mean,
it's different.
I don't know if I always want to feel like I'm being chased in my career. So I definitely felt that in New York.
Oh, for sure. Whenever I would do stand up in New York or like go out in New York, I'm like, people in New York are going out and doing things because they hate their shitty apartment. People in LA are going out and doing things because they want to go do that thing.
That's absolutely true. Absolutely true.
They could stay home and enjoy it. But in New York, it's like, oh, I'm 30 and I have to have 2 roommates and it's terrible. I'm going to go to the show.
I better get out now.
Yeah. I better go to this bar. It's going to be a lot better. So it's like a totally different motivation. Friday night, final night of the week. What'd you do?
I watched all the hit shows of the era. So I watched Frasier, I watched Mad About You, and I watched Seinfeld. And I remain a huge Seinfeld fan. I actually watched Seinfeld during pandemic, the beginning to the very end. And I don't even think I had seen a lot of those episodes. And so that was super fun. A lot of it really is still hilarious. And, I think there is something really universal about that show, which is why it has lasted so long. It's so popular. Frasier, I liked, I know more than I did then, but I always loved John Maloney, that character actor. He was so great. Such a great John Mahoney.
John Mahoney, yep. Who was in Say Anything. He played Ione Skye's dad in Say Anything. And it just popped up.
He's so great. And I love David Hyde Pierce too. David Hyde Pierce is a major theater actor. He does a lot of theater. And he sings, and I think he's super great. So, I mean,
even Kelsey Grammer is a big theater.
Totally. Yeah. So that was fun. And then Mad About You, I always had a soft spot for Mad About You. I have not watched the reboot. I don't really have a lot of interest in it. Their chemistry was amazing. I love Helen Hunt. She's in one of my all-time favorite movies.
As Good as It Gets.
As Good as It Gets is it's just such a perfect movie, and she's so great in it. And then I have an honorable mention, which was not during the time frame, but Noise is Off, which is a stage show that later became a film.
Neil Simon? Is that Neil Simon?
No, it's Michael Frayn.
Okay.
And it feels like Neil Simon because it is all physical comedy, and John Ritter starred in it, and so many people I know, it's their all-time favorite play. So I think it's a really good entry point for someone who doesn't really know theater and how theater can translate to film in a great way. And that's kind of my feature, is a little bit like that in a way. I love Noises Off. I love seeing it live, but I also love it. I love the filmed version of it. I think it's just a really delightful, funny backstage comedy.
It's a true farce. John Ritter's kind of perfect because it's not that different from Three's Company in a lot of ways.
No. And I loved Three's Company. I definitely had a huge crush on him when I was a kid. And I thought all of his skills lended themselves to this. And then, that sort of like how madcap it is backstage, right? Because it really is.
It's chaos. It's absolute chaos.
It's chaos. And it's great representation of that. And farce, when you say like, oh my gosh, Moliere is farce, and farce feels like something that's really far removed from what we do. But actually there's so much farce in storytelling now. And I really like that. So I always say, oh no, watch noises off. That is the definition of farce. And it's great. It's really great.
Yeah, it's like, Seinfeld is a farce. It's like a little bit more cynical of. It's funny that all the shows you picked are so New York. Like whenever I ask people like what is the quintessentially New York sitcom, it's almost always Seinfeld.
That's funny.
They always say it, which is funny because like they never shot a single frame. But it is set in New York, and I love that show growing up. I have less affinity for it now because in a lot of ways it's dated or so of its time because it was so trend setting. But it was great and isn't that dissimilar to Noises Off. And it's funny if you go, like, I really love watching like the Gold Diggers Night or like those old sort of backstage 30s, which weirdly feel really contemporary and not different from them because sort of nothing changes.
I love the inverse of that, which is All About Eve, which is like the dramatic side of how terrible, the show business can be. But I hear what you're saying. I mean, I love Julia Louis-Dreyfus. I love Veep. I think Veep also a farce, by the way.
Good. Oh, absolutely.
And I love, like, I don't know if everything ages as well as she, like, in every way she has aged so beautifully. So I think I really was like focusing on her when I watched it. And, she's just delightful. And it is so New York. But what I think is so New York, even though the shots are not, I mean, they could have, if they really shot it in New York, it would have been so great.
Yeah.
But because Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld knew New York so inside out backwards, like when they talk about an H&H bagel, everybody who's ever lived in New York knows H&H. There's no kind of substitute for like the Zabar's reference or whatever the thing is, because if you live there, you're like, yes, I identify with that thing. And I think for me, when I was growing up in New York or growing up in Las Vegas, I would always wish I was in New York. I was always like, when I get to New York, it'll be this thing. Right. So I had really idealized it. Obviously, like working 3 jobs and killing yourself to like make a living. And you have to. I think that's the hard thing is it became such a destination and the price of rent became so impossible that, a lot of people I know were like, it's not worth it.
Yeah. I can't do this forever. Yeah. Same with all the comics I know. It's such a struggle there, and you really have to want to be there. Yeah. And to your point, it is interesting. The thing about Seinfeld is it's missing the grit that New York has, but at the same time, it's not a sanitized version of New York because it is so sort of culturally New York without being the sort of gritty New York. Yeah. It's like LA gloss, but definitely New York substance, I guess is what I would say.
I mean, I think also when you're making a sitcom, right? Like how far can you push that grit anyway? I mean, I don't know a lot of
Barney Miller. If you ever watched Barney Miller, that had that New York 70s grit, or like even Night Court a little bit.
Yeah. I know Night Court.
That's about as far as you can go, I think. Like there's like prostitutes and there's, violence and then like people, and cops, and like it kind of has that sort of New York vibe, but that seems about, you don't want Homicide: Life on the Street, the sitcom. Although maybe, I don't know.
I think you should write it, Ken. I'm
going to pitch it. It's so funny. Well, that is the week. To close out here, I just want to read you the cheers and jeers from this week and see if you agree or disagree, because TV Guide has opinions, and these weirdly are pretty appropriate to what we were talking about. So they start with a cheer. Cheers to keeping the faith. The final Seinfeld episode scrupulously observed co-creator Larry David's charter mandate: no hugging, no learning. When Jerry and George leave the NBC executive offices after learning their all but forgotten sitcom Jerry has been resurrected, the guys rejoice at their windfall and they come this close to embracing, but at the last second they shudder and shy away from each other. Anyone who saw the so-called New York Four struggle in their jail cell at the end knows the querulous quartet certainly didn't emerge from the ordeal any wiser.
I think a lot of people were super disappointed by the ending of Seinfeld. They wanted something mushy or something. Yeah, they wanted something that felt the way they felt about the characters, but the characters actually did not feel that way about each other,
They
right?
kind of hate each other.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think that was super appropriate. And I actually love Curb Your Enthusiasm. I really love Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Yeah.
I think Curb does things that Seinfeld couldn't do, right? But wanted to do. And so I really appreciate that that is as dark as it wants to be. And I think Seinfeld is like the final episode of Seinfeld is the precursor to what we were going to expect from Curb Your, jail cell.
It's a perfect sort of transition.
That's right. That's right.
This is an all Seinfeld cheers and jeers, by the way, because it was the finale. Cheers to good genes. Sure, Jerry's parents were funny arguing about how tall Xena the Warrior Princess is, but the real scene stealer was George's father, Jerry Stiller. So it's just talking about how great Jerry Stiller and Estelle Harris were, which, I mean, Jerry Stiller to me on Seinfeld is the best character on Seinfeld.
He's great. He's great. He has some of the most quotable lines. He has some of the funniest moments. I mean, Jerry Stiller, to me, was like, that is Queens. You know what I mean? That is like that badly behaved Cadillac driving, can't look over the steering wheel. I think he's, I really loved, and Estelle Harris was in it.
Estelle Harris. That like barely contained rage all the time, but in argument about it, it was just perfect. And then this was something I forgot about during the finale. So cheers to appropriate ads. We liked the Visa commercial that flashed through all the garish 70s outfit at the Attic, a vintage clothing store in Las Vegas. It was a kaleidoscope riot of patent leather and polyester. At least now we know where Kramer shops.
That's funny. I don't remember the commercial at all. But it's interesting because then Jerry Seinfeld ended up doing credit card commercials, right? And there's this like sort of fable about him and the Black American Express. So I think that that makes sense in the Seinfeld, universe, multiverse.
I forget how that, I mean, obviously it was such a massive show, but they made specific to the Seinfeld finale commercials like it was the Super Bowl.
It was huge.
It's crazy. And then finally they give a cheers to the stand-up finish, which is that epilogue of that episode where Jerry's doing the same stand-up routine he did in the pilot, but in prison, in a prison jumpsuit, and it sort of ends as it begins.
I do love when a showrunner has the vision to loop a show for you, and it feels like a final finished kind of thing, right? And to me, even like The Sopranos to me is one of the and I'm not alone in this. A lot of people think it's some of the best television ever, but there was such care to really, it's not tying up everything. It's not making everything perfect, but you can see the cycle of how those people were thinking about the character. And it was a complete loop. And I really do feel that way about Seinfeld, that there was, there wasn't anything that was left unturned. Right. And even though it was on for a long time, I do feel like they it was consistent. Yeah, there was a real consistency. You never felt like, oh my gosh, there's somebody else making this TV show now. And I think when the changing of the guard happens a lot, or when a show is on for 9 seasons, something like that, you feel like, oh God, it lost its luster, or it didn't work out.
It's a different show now. Yeah.
But I actually think they got better at working with each other. And I think certainly the cast, at least, and the storytelling felt even more like idiosyncratic and specific in a great way. So I mean, I didn't know when I picked this week, I didn't know Seinfeld ended this week. Also, Murphy Brown ended this week, which I really liked Murphy Brown so much when I was a kid. Again, like that idea of what is Office like?
It's a newsroom, and they're like on TV, but also like hard nosed. Yeah.
But Candace Bergen was so great. The whole cast was great. So Charles Kimbrough, I worked with Charles Kimbrough when he did some theater for off-Broadway company I worked for. So I thought it was super cool. And then another show ended this week too. What was it? Larry Sanders show ended this week.
Yep. Another hugely groundbreaking show that would influence, like Seinfeld and Larry Sanders specifically. So much stuff we got in the 2000s were just a direct result of.
And I didn't know that Judd Apatow was like Larry Sanders' mentor, Judd Apatow. And
Mm-hmm.
so like that makes so much sense to me. And, you know, I kind of love that backstory idea too. So yeah, that was cool to think about. What a big week in television and some film stuff. Frank Sinatra passing away, you know, a lot going on in that era.
And we graduated high school, which clearly was...
We graduated high school, and I turned 18 that week too.
Me too. My birthday's in June.
When's your birthday?
The 28th. So it's...
Mine's May 31st.
Okay.
So yeah, so it was like, oh my gosh, like so much change, and I was so ready to, you know, do the next thing.
Same. Yeah. I moved out immediately.
Yeah. I did. I went away in the fall to St. Louis, and I was like, I will, you know, I'm ready to do all the entertainment.
Yeah.
Growing up, and yeah, I'm an adult now. Here I go. Murphy Brown taught me everything I know. Watch me.
Yeah, I'm good as in hindsight, which is hilarious. But thank you so much for doing this. It's been great talking to you.
You too. My gosh, you have such a wealth of knowledge. I felt like
it's useful to no one,
but very entertaining.
There you go. That's Michelle. She's great. Cannot thank her enough for taking the time to talk to me. Really had a good time chatting with her. And check out her feature film, Under the Lantern Lit. It's really, why is this so hard for me to say? Under the Lantern Lit Sky. I think it's my Boston accent that I'm constantly fighting, and I want to go under the lantern lit sky, which would just be a mushmouth mess. But it is sort of perfectly suited to be difficult for me. I sort of have to have a level of low-level concentration constantly to not speak with a Boston accent. And that is my struggle. That is my curse, everybody. That is my fate. Anyway, your fate is to be here next week to listen to a brand new edition of TV Guidance Counselor.
Wow. You know what? I have not thought of dinosaurs as an existential crisis